Hello, I'm Robin. Welcome to BookSpin. This is Death's End by Liu Cixin, the finale in the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, which I've just finished on a reread. And this book was published originally in 2010 in Chinese, before the English translation came out in 2016. This book went on to gather quite a lot of attention and critical acclaim, both within China and around the world. It went on to win the Lucas Award, and I think one reason for its success is just the level of ambition within this novel and its ideas. It's certainly one of the most ambitious novels that I've ever read, both in terms of the scale of its plot and its grand ideas and concepts. So the events that take place within the story are on a cosmic scale, and they ultimately concern the fate of human civilization, the fate of the Earth, and even the fate of the universe. So it's really full to the brim with big ideas, not just really big ideas, but some really mind-boggling stuff. So I'm going to try and introduce this book in a way without dropping any spoilers. I think it's difficult to talk about any plot details without spoiling it. So, well, I'll have a go anyway. This book continues the saga that began in the first two books concerning the coming invasion of Earth by the Trisolarans, who are an advanced extraterrestrial race. And at the end of book 2, we've reached a point where a concept is introduced called dark forest deterrence, which manages to keep the invaders at bay and maintain an uneasy peace between human civilization and Trisolaran civilization. So that is the point at which the story has developed by the end of the second book. So in the third book, we go back in time, back to the present era, and we get introduced to a new character, and her name is Cixin, and she is a young aerospace engineer in the early 21st century. So by this point, the Trisolaran invasion is still sort of, this is still news at this point. Humanity has not yet come up with an effective response. So we get a kind of parallel narrative at the same time that the Wallfacer project is introduced in book 2, and that's announced to the world. We get another initiative which is introduced by the Planetary Intelligence Agency in this story. And this program is called the Staircase Project, whose goal is to launch a probe into space with the aim of gathering intelligence from the Trisolaran fleet. And Cixin is employed to take part in this project, and while she's not the leader of the project, she is instrumental in how it unfolds. And so this is interesting because it's introduced as a kind of parallel narrative to some of the events that get described in book 2. And so that's how she gets introduced. But really, that's just one small section of the story. That's just the first act. So I think there are 6 parts to this story, and the first part is about 100 pages long, something like that, for a 600-page book. So she gets introduced in this section in our own time. But what happens is the story keeps on leaping forward in time. We get, at the end of each section, the end of each act, we get a time jump. So that the narrative itself takes place over several centuries, like far into the future. But Cixin remains our point of view character throughout this time. And she survives these eons through the application of hibernation technology. So she's periodically frozen to wake up again at a strategic point in time in the future. Right? So she comes to take on a very important role that will have a profound effect on how events are going to unfold in relation to humanity's response to the Trisolaran invasion, and beyond that, the ultimate course of human civilization. So I apologize if that sounds quite vague. It doesn't really describe what's going on in the story at all, but like I said, it's difficult to discuss without spoiling it. But I think one thing that it is interesting to think about is the characterization in this book. So Cixin is the main character for this book, and I think she's definitely more of a sympathetic character than the protagonists in the previous two books. So just as a point of comparison, in the first book we have Ye Wenjie, who is basically the main villain in this series, because it's her fault that this invasion is taking place. She deliberately instigated the Trisolar crisis by making contact with the Trisolarans and actively inviting them to invade our world. And she even sets up an organization to help them to destroy human civilization. She's our protagonist in book one. We also have another character called Wang Miao, who is like the investigator in book one. But honestly, I think he's a very forgettable character. Nothing really interesting to him. Then in book two, we have Luo Ji, who is one of the Wall Facers and who is instrumental in formulating the Dark Forest deterrence system, which is the most effective resistance plan that humans can come up with against the Trisolarans. So he is quite an interesting character, I think. He's a bit of an anti-hero because he is, for most of the book, he is selfish and lazy, and he refuses to take any responsibility. And it's only later on in book two when he actually starts to do something, which ultimately will have a very profound impact. So if we compare Cixin to all of these characters, she's the total contrast. So she is basically a decent and caring person. In many respects is quite an unremarkable individual. She just wants to do the right thing, but she's not at all suited to being a leader, I think. She doesn't have any of the charisma or qualities of what we might expect of a hero. So in that respect, she's quite similar to Luo Ji, but for different reasons. But it's kind of strange because people keep on putting faith in her, and she's put into positions of huge responsibility, and it's kind of questionable what's going on here, because she's actually quite a passive character. She doesn't so much control the influence of events as so much as she just lets things happen around her. She just does what people expect of her rather than making her own choices. And this is something I think that is a little bit controversial. This is something that the writer sometimes gets criticized for, in that why can't he make a strong female character? Why are all his male characters strong, relatively speaking, but he's got like a weak female lead? And I don't think this is necessarily because he's misogynistic or anything. I just don't think character building is his strong point in general. and his characters just serve a purpose, and that purpose is to drive the story forward, and that's pretty much it. And the fact that she's a woman is just kind of incidental. But so yeah, I think the only really sort of memorable and interesting character in this whole series is Luo Ji. But that, for me, that's not a big deal, right? Because this is not a character-focused story. It's a concept-driven story. The characters serve a purpose to drive the story forward, but really it's the big ideas are what hook you into this book. And let me tell you, this is where the real strength of this book lies. I would say that this book is the epitome of what you might call mind-blowing science fiction. So you do get a sense of this from the first two books, but Death's End takes it to a whole new level. So some of the things that we get to explore include things like artificial intelligence, massive space engineering projects, cryogenic hibernation, light speed travel, time dilation, multi-dimensionality, even bending the laws of physics to suit human ends. All these kind of things, which, you know, the kind of things that sci-fi nerds like me love, and it's all done in such a marvelous and compelling way. And sometimes things get really bizarre and trippy even. So, for example, entering new dimensions of space. This is one of my favourite sort of parts of this book. And it's a recurring theme, actually. And we get some of the most fascinating and memorable descriptions in which we leave the three-dimensional world behind and enter four-dimensional fragments of space. So four-dimensional space is described in such vivid and magical and bizarre terms. It almost reads like a kind of mystical experience, I think. So this is where I think the quality of the prose is best demonstrated, is in some of these descriptions. And it also, I think, is evidence that as a writer, Liu Cixin has definitely got better since the first book. So, it's really fascinating stuff, and it's difficult to do justice, I think, just talking about it. I think you to really appreciate what I'm saying, you need to read this book, or at least read the bits that I'm talking about. And there are so many things that happen in this book which just really blew me away. And especially once you get to the final quarter or so, it just gets insane. So, yeah, I can't really go into any detail without spoiling it, so you just have to take my word for it. A lot of people rank this book among their favourite ever books, and certainly their favourite ever sci-fi books, and I can definitely see why. And I agree, it's an excellent novel. It's not quite my favourite in the series. I think my favourite would be The Dark Forest, the second book, and that's probably because Luo Ji is the most interesting protagonist. I really enjoyed his character study, and I just really liked the way that the story unfolded in that book. So, but Death's End is still an amazing book. Like I said, it's somewhat lacking in interesting characters, but that's a pretty minor issue. When the ideas are this captivating, you can overlook everything else. So I'm going to give Death's End 4.5 stars, and I highly recommend it. Right, so I think we've reached a point now where I've finished this trilogy, and I'm going to go back to my sort of more regular reading schedule. I'm going to do another book review trio at some point. So I've already decided what books I'll be reading for the next trio, at least 2 of them. I'm going to read Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I heard of a lot of great things about this book. And I'm also continuing the books from my Hidden Gems of Sci-Fi video. And the one I've picked for the next cycle will be Little Fuzzy by H. Beam Piper. I just started reading this book. And that just leaves one more book to fill, which means after a long hiatus, it's time to spin the BookSpinner. Okay, I've given the BookSpinner a bit of a makeover. My TBR has exploded recently as I've acquired a lot of books. So I wanted to kind of keep it under control somewhat. So I've narrowed it down to 80, which is still a lot of books. The other books I'm still planning to read at some point. They're just on the back burner. And this list doesn't include other books which I'm planning to read at some point soon, like Children of Time, for example. But anyway, let's take a look. We have one more random pick for my next read. The Platypus of Doom. Okay, so this is The Platypus of Doom and Other Nihilists by Arthur Byron Cover. Journey into a universe where the strangest monsters ever imagined will make you shudder, laugh, and think twice. Beware, inside this book are dangerous creatures whose whims control the universe. The Platypus of Doom, who can grant wishes even into the afterlife, to the everlasting sorrow of the man who does the wishing, the Armadillo of Destruction, who delights in amplifying the fiery force of hatred wherever he finds it, the Aardvark of Despair, who instills a suicidal depression in his victims that only the single-minded can shake off, the Clown of Catastrophe, the sex symbol of the spheres, whose mission is to pervert the noble emotion of love into disillusionment. Psycho science fiction at its funniest and most insightful. Okay, this will be interesting. This will be included in the next book review trio coming soon. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.